Thank you, Mark. Good day to everybody. Hope everyone's keeping well. Welcome to this webinar, as Mark says, the second part of building the management system. I'd just like to introduce myself. So my name is Richard King-Davies, and I am a full-time employee of TUV Sud in the UK. I'm a lead auditor for ISO 9001, TL 9000 and ESD 2020. I've worked in approximately 55 countries around the world, conducting audits, and have been doing the work for 20 years now. Doesn't mean I'm an expert. What it does mean is that I have picked up some tips and ideas of the right and wrong ways to do things with respect to management system. As a result of doing the work that I do, it's become very clear to me and the folks that I work with in TUV in the UK that our passion lies with improving people, improving organisations, to spark that improvement activity, to ignite it, to sustain our clients on the journey towards excellence. I've spent 12 years in the offshore hydrocarbon, nuclear fuel reprocessing and electricity generating industries. And as I said, 21 years as a third-party lead auditor for management systems. My hobbies, I like throwing myself off mountains and sailing, and I believe that a day without laughter is clearly a day wasted. So having fun and enjoying every moment of every day is something that we need to cherish and embrace. Quick agenda for the day. We're going to get straight into building the management system part 2, preceded by a quick recap of the fundamental parts of the first part of the webinar. So welcome to it, and we build on that webinar, the previous webinar, the foundations of a business management system. In a previous webinar, I covered the subject of potential pitfalls that I have seen organisations face on the journey towards being certified to ISO 9001 2015. You can find the online or on-demand rather version of these 2 webinars on our resource centre on our website. So today's purpose of today's webinar, again, is to hopefully present some tips and ideas to cross the divide between today's reality and tomorrow's effective management system being in place. Hopefully it will give you some clues and ideas about how you go about building the foundations of your management system. First of all, as I talked about in the previous webinar, the ISO 9001 standard, that's the ISO 9001 2015, will not be subject to the usual cycle of updates and changes and will remain as it is for the foreseeable future. This should give people a level of confidence that what they're doing today for their management system is going to be valid for the next few years without the threat of any changes coming down the pike at people. It also means that it's a massive vote that the standard works as it is. If there was a need to change, if the standard was not working, they would indeed have made the change. So to recap, let's just figure out recap what we talked about in the previous webinar. So leadership are on board with the whole process of becoming certified. They understand what their responsibilities are. They understand the stage on which their business is conducted, and they've defined the parts that all the actors might play on that stage, and how they could impact the business. The leadership have also created a hymn sheet from which the entire organisation will be singing. Furthermore, we have measures in place to track progress towards the aims outlined in the hymn sheet. We've mapped our processes, and there's a defined purpose statement for each purpose, and we've kept things really simple as far as we can. The core process thingies have some kind of way of being monitored. So we've identified the processes, we've mapped them, we have a purpose statement, and we've also got processes or methodologies in place to monitor and measure those processes so that we can ensure that the planned result is being achieved. We've also mapped the customer journey through the organisation, those process flows, not how we would like it to be, but we've actually mapped it how it is, and that's a very important thing to do. It's actually mapping it warts and all. So that's been done. From that process flow, because hopefully we use swim lanes, we understand who is doing what clearly in the organisation, and this helps define the roles and responsibilities, a subject I'll return to later in this webinar. We understand understand the interactions of the support processes and how they fit into the flow, such things as IT, HR, finance, and where they touch on that customer journey through the organisation. We've not lost fact, however, that the whole purpose of what we're doing is to improve the business. Number of people have been doing a lot of learning, hopefully within the organisation, with some people becoming subject matter experts on the standard and its requirements. As I said, leadership have educated themselves in all that they must do and are utterly devoted to it. I cannot emphasise that enough. Without leadership's commitment, top management's commitment to the management system, it will only ever lead to mediocre results. Furthermore, you've devised a long-term plan, a strategy for your business management system. Although this is not a requirement in ISO 9000, experience shows that it really is the smart thing to do, rather than just looking towards that certification date, actually thinking 2, 3, 4, 5 years beyond that and what you want as an organisation from your management system. You've also started to select your certification company, starting to interview auditors as well as organisations to see if they're a fit for you. You've also investigated other local companies that you might be able to contact and thus to learn from, to see how they've overcome the challenges, and also equally they could benefit from learning from what you are doing. So to finally kind of recap for the final slide, when you're up to your neck in mud and bullets being bitten by alligators, it's difficult to remember that the original intention is to drain the swamp. And don't lose sight of the fact that you have a business to run. You need to keep giving the customers what they want, when they want it, at a price they're prepared to pay. Your business management system must have this concept at its core, even while you are developing it. It's no excuse for not giving the customers what they want, when they want it, at a price they're prepared to pay. So what do we do next? There's still much to do. Let's talk about the control processes. In previous versions of ISO 9001, that's the 2008 version and the 2000 version, let's not go back to the 1994 versions. It was prescribed that you had to have certain procedures in place. I always have referred to those as control processes. The first control of those control processes is about documentation. And it used to be document and data control, and now it's called documented information. You need to be able to control the information within your organisation, and that includes anything related to customers and external parties. A big thrust of the GDPR introduction recently has been around making sure that you are capturing and controlling all of that customer data and thus protecting it. But don't overdo it. We don't need to go nuts on how much information that is captured and controlled in the organisation. I have seen actually an approved process for how to make coffee. We don't need that kind of information. But there are some guidelines as to how much documentation you need in an organisation. Those guidelines are very simple. They're the size and type of the business. So if you've got a massive organisation, the chances are you're going to need more documentation than you would if you were a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 person company. So the size and type of the business is one factor that determines the extent of the documentation. The complexity of the processes. Simple processes, we don't need masses of documentation. If we have very complex processes, clearly we need to make sure that we have sufficient documentation to ensure control of those processes. Competence of the employees. Hopefully we've got employees that understand what it is that they are doing. If we do have high competent employees and you can demonstrate that competence, the extent of the documentation can be reduced. Conversely, if you have employees who are in for a short period of time, part-time employees or short-term agency staff, you're going to need more in the way of documentation to enable them to be able to do the job. Records. Although not officially spoken to in ISO 9001-2015 as the term documented information is used, we still need records, and there are numerous records called out within the ISO standard. But clearly those records need to be able to, you need to be able to demonstrate that you've met all the requirements of the organization. So such things as, have you met the customer requirements? You'll need records to show that you have in fact met those customer requirements. You need to make sure that you're covered from a statutory and regulatory requirement, so that you've got records to show that you are meeting those obligations imposed upon you from a legal perspective. You need to also make clear that those records show that you've met both stated and unstated requirements. This is a bit of a complex area. Stated requirements are simply those that are written down. They might be in a contract, or they might be in the regulatory framework in which your organisation is functioning. You can also have unstated requirements. So that's something that's not written down, but it is generally the way things are done throughout your industry. So making sure that you have records to show that you've met both stated and unstated requirements is something that you need to have in place. The requirements of the ISO standard, you need to make sure that you can demonstrate that you've met the requirements and your organisation continues to meet the requirements of the ISO standard. And lastly, what are the requirements of your business management system? You need to be able to demonstrate that your business management system is working, and what certain records are required for that. These requirements, yes, certain things as meeting your business management system, and showing you're meeting the requirements. They are very important things to be doing, and sometimes in actual fact, in the worst case scenario, can be your defense against any potential lawsuits that come down the pipe, that might come down the pike at you. Bit more on control processes. Things go wrong. If we don't do anything, things don't go wrong, but things do go wrong. It's inevitable. But what we need to do is we need to control the impacted outputs, as in separating the good from the bad. In a manufacturing scenario, that will be product that does not meet the requirements. It's out of tolerance for whatever reason. We need to make sure we've got processes in place to separate the good from the bad. But it also can be inaccurate data, for instance. So not just physical outputs, but also the written outputs, the documented outputs. They also need to be controlled. We need to have a method in place of correcting those outputs. For instance, either reworking them or actually scrapping those outputs, changing them in the terms of data, and also finally, and this is a vital part that most organisations really struggle to get correct, which is finding the cause. What was the cause of the output that was non-conforming? Root cause analysis is a webinar in and of itself, but it's absolutely fundamental to controlling those outputs and also to learning, because the next part of the process is to eliminate the cause. It's not just a question of eliminating the actual symptom, it's actually a question of eliminating the cause. We also need to understand where the same issues could apply elsewhere. They could happen in one area of the organisation. It could easily happen somewhere else. So there has to be a method to look across at other parts of the organisation where to see where the same symptom, or indeed sometimes the same causes, could happen again. We also need to have a methodology to update the risks of the business management system. And it isn't just the risks, it's also the opportunities. So understanding and doing the learning that comes out of these issues is a key part of improvement of any organisation. A client once said to me, problems are precious. And I love that expression, because there's so much that can be learned from when things go wrong. That they will go wrong is almost inevitable. I've yet to come across an organisation that is perfect and things never go wrong. So there will be things going wrong in your organisation. And we need to make sure that we can maximise the learning from the things that go wrong. That is a truly important factor. Competence. This is another subject that you need to be covering in your management system. And the first question is, are your employees competent in the execution of their tasks, and how can you prove it? Okay, So one of the ways that you could do this is to go back to the process flow, which if you have used swim lanes, as talked to in the previous webinar, it's very clear to see who is doing what within your organization within that core process flow. You need to define the competence that you need for those employees who are operating within those swim lanes. You need to understand what skills, what experience that they need to have to operate those processes, to execute those processes. And then furthermore, you need to be able to demonstrate that your employees have that defined level of competence. So first of all, you need to define what competence is needed, and then you need to be able to demonstrate that your employees have that competence. But how you do it is entirely up to you. Some of the ways that we see it is through job descriptions, skill matrices, whatever. It doesn't matter how you do it. All you need to be able to do is demonstrate that your employees have competence. When it comes to employees that are time served, there is no issues with grandfathering those folks into your management system based on their time served and experience. But you need to be able to demonstrate the longevity, if you like, of those employees, and that you have looked at and reviewed their level of experience. More on competence, if there are gaps. So you've defined the necessary competence that you need for a particular activity, task or job. But if you're seeing gaps when you actually look at the competence of the people who are executing that work, you need to have plans in place. And furthermore, not just have the plans, but be executing those plans such that you successfully close the gaps that exist between your defined competence and the competence that you have within the organization. A lot of organizations, rightly so, include the induction process within their organizations, which covers all that should be learnt in the way of competence for the new starters in the organization. There is a word of warning about this. What I've talked about sounds very simple, but I've seen many organizations become very overcomplex about the area of competence, and they tend to get their underwear wrapped around their axles over it, and we end up seeing reams of documentation, none of which is truly effective. But so our advice on that is to keep it simple. If it's complex, it will become a burden to maintain. Thus, it will also be expensive. And because it is a burden to maintain, the chances are actually it will not be maintained. So it's vital to keep it simple. Organisational knowledge is a new factor that came in, a new aspect that came in the 2015 version of the ISO 9001. Because it's inevitable that employees will leave your company. But nevertheless, it's no excuse for a drop in the quality that you provide to your customers. It's no excuse for a slip in the customer experience. Retaining all the knowledge that your employees have is a tall order, but it's clear that you get a continuity if you understand which people know what in your organization, and how you can transfer that information successfully to ensure that continuity towards the customer experience. But it makes sense to make sure you can capture, as far as is possible, all of the knowledge that is in your company. Frankly, waiting for people to leave is too late to be doing this activity. A month or 2 weeks before people leave, it's just too small amount of time to capture all of the knowledge that the leaving people have, that they will be inevitably taking with them. So one way of overcoming this is by effective succession planning. So that is when someone leaves, you understand who's got to be taking their place. But it also can go into cross-functional learning. Again, skills matrices are very useful in this, so you can see where you have skills in depth, should people either leave on a permanent basis or even go away on holiday, as is their right. So you need to understand that that organisational knowledge that you need to make sure those processes tick along and you keep your customers happy. But again, if you get changes coming in the organisation, you also need to make sure that you understand what knowledge gaps might be created by those changes. If you're moving into new technology, for instance, you need to understand that you're going to have to educate people to get people learning about that new technology, to understand the possible gaps. And that should be an output of any planning activity. Resources, massive subject in ISO 9001, 2015. And frankly, there is no excuse for not having the needed resources if customer satisfaction deteriorates. An absence of resources is not an excuse for compromising the effective operation of the business management system. It could be a webinar in and of itself when talking about resources, but when you're thinking about the resources that you need to support your business and your business management system, think about the people, think about the infrastructure, think about the work environment. If it's boiling hot in your organization, which seems appropriate right at the moment, people are not going to be able to focus on what it is that they need to be able to do. So you need to be looking at that environment, that work environment. You also need to look at your calibration needs and maintenance needs. It's not about just calibrating a piece of equipment. It's also how you make sure that the actual manufacturing equipment is maintained and suitable resources are provided, not only for the implementation of that equipment, but also for maintaining it. You also need to consider the needs of external providers. So that is the people from whom you buy products or services. What resource do you need to provide those external providers with to help you give your customers what they are looking for? Calibration, again, a subject that would be an entire webinar on its own, but I'm going to touch on one aspect of calibration that so many people do not seem to fully understand until it's pointed out, and then it becomes fairly obvious. There's a lot of organizations that simply do not understand one of the fundamental points of calibration. When an instrument is calibrated, when it has its annual cycle or its 6-monthly cycle, whatever that interval might be, when it is calibrated, all that action is doing is validating the past measurements taken by that instrument. The past measurements taken by that instrument. What it is not doing is not making sure that that instrument, or whatever it might be, is working the day after it's calibrating. So you might have an instrument that's calibrated, it could have fallen out of calibration, it could have been dropped by a courier or any other reason on its way back to you, or damaged in some shape, size or form, and you will not know that until the next time it is calibrated. So in essence, there could be an issue with a risk of recall, for instance, in the worst case scenario. And I have seen this actually have to happen with some of my clients. Calibration is always backwards looking. It's only validating the use that that instrument has been put to since it was last calibrated. Purchasing, you need to buy stuff. So what is it that we need to acquire? We need to acquire things, we might need to buy in services, we might need to hire people. But you need to be in control of this process. You need to buy from suppliers that you have confidence in, new and existing, and you need to be able to prove your confidence. Why do you buy from these people? Why did you select to buy from these people? You need to have the data and the methodology for ensuring that people that you do business with and acquire things from external providers actually are doing what you ask them to do. You need to be able to analyze the performance of these suppliers. You don't need to go into great depth. I've seen some organizations who analyze up the yin yang of the performance of their suppliers, and that's all very well and good. Other people will take a much lesser view of this and will maybe just look at on-time delivery and quality performance. And that's fine. You know your suppliers, you know the impact that the goods and services that you're acquiring, you know the impact that they have on your management system. You need to be able to make that, to demonstrate that you understand what that impact is and how your suppliers work towards helping you give the customers what they want when they want it at a price they're prepared to pay. Dr. Edward Deming, a guru when it comes to quality. It's not, although his work is not explicitly in ISO 9001, 2015, I believe it's a fundamental point of any management system to end the practice of awarding business on the basis of price tag. Don't always go for the cheapest option. I have come across many clients where, and I've heard many stories whereby organizations have done this, and the long-term detriment is just significant. Deming also espoused moving towards a single supplier for any one item that you might purchase or acquire, and to then build a long-term partnership of loyalty and trust. So you're actually partnering, he espouses a partnering with your suppliers, and they can then be assured of the business, your business, for X years down the road. This was one of the points that Dr. Edward Deming wrote in his 14 Points for Management, which was published in about 1988. Furthermore, outsourcing. Outsourcing is an activity whereby you might not have the skill sets in-house to design a product, or you might not have the capabilities to paint or plate a product. So you can absolutely outsource these processes. That's not an issue at all, but you need to make sure actually that you have control over those outsourced processes. So for instance, a painting application, you might need to make sure that you understand the paint thickness that's being put onto the paint, the cleaning methodologies of the substrate before it's being painted, and you need to have that information as if it was your own process, but maybe one step back. You need to be able to demonstrate actually that those outsourced processes are under your control. It's a little bit difficult at times, this one, because some organizations can be reluctant to provide the level of detail that you're requiring to demonstrate that your processes are under control. Are our customers happy? Do your customers feel that their requirements are being met? It's important to realize that the word perception is actually used in the ISO 9001 standard, a delightfully subjective term, but it's what customer satisfaction is all about. Do your customers feel as though their requirements are being met? You might be able to turn around and say, well, we delivered the right quality at the right time and at the right price, but nevertheless, there is issues with it, maybe with the presentation of the product in the packaging, call it what you will. It can impact that customer perception and that customer level of satisfaction. One word I usually like to ask during an audit is, do your customers love you so much that they would tattoo your name on their bodies? A bit extreme perhaps, but you need to be able to find out if your customers are happy. You proactively need to get information from your customers. And before you start questioning, is it a scenario that's likely that a customer would tattoo the name of their company on their bodies? Well, there are three examples that come immediately to mind. For instance, Harley Davidson, Apple, and football clubs. So Manchester United being a prime point. So it does happen. It's not as extreme as it sounds. It's not a requirement in ISO, by the way, that people should tattoo your company name on their bodies. Also remember that a customer complaint, when properly responded to, can be an opportunity to turn a customer from being a terrorist to actively undermine your organization into an apostle, whereby they actually praise your organization and they continue to give you their business because they can see that you're responding well to issues that they might be encounter. That was a phrase that was told to me by the CEO of a large global tech company, the name of which obviously I cannot speak in this webinar. Again, stuff happens. You know, the roads to keeping customers happy is not always smooth. What is important, however, is how you deal with it, how you respond to those issues that makes the difference. And it all starts with proactively finding out if your customers are happy. So you need a process that helps you proactively find out what those customers are. It does not state in this, find out what the level of customer satisfaction is. It does not state in the standard any particular method. Surveys, direct interactions, however it might be, is okay, provided it's an effective methodology. And it's important that you learn from what went well with your customers. What did they love about working with your organization? Because if you can understand what the customers actually like about your organization, guess what? You can repeat it. So there's as much to be learned from what went well as much as you do from what went badly. It is all about continual learning. Communication is another requirement in the standard. And frankly, we all think we're better at communicating than we really are. It's a common fact that we having nothing to communicate is actually something to communicate. Any passenger on the UK rail network, any frequent passenger on the UK rail network, will have experienced the frustration of understanding or not understanding exactly what is going on. So if there is nothing to communicate, maybe that is something to communicate. But you need to define as part of your business management system what will be communicated, when communication shall happen, with whom you're going to communicate, that's both internal and external, and how will communication happen, who will do the communicating. It might be that your organization is experiencing a significant issue and that you're spending a lot of time investigating exactly what is happening. Don't just be quiet when that's going on. Tell people that you're actually investigating what's going on, because then they don't feel as though they've got to chase you, that they can rely on you to get back to them with the full story as and when they can. So it is not just a question, however, of communicating externally. It's what needs to be communicated internally through the organisation as well. This was a new requirement in ISO 9001 in the 2015 version, and it has presented some issues with organisations that I've worked with in the past. Changes. We all need to change, whether it be to improve, whether it's to react to market shift, or in some cases, just to survive. Organisations need to be able to change. The world is speeding up, that is clear, and the need for business nimbleness has never been more apparent than it has been in the last 18 months. The whole pandemic that has been occurring for the last 18 months or so has shown that organisations that can turn on a dime and change their business models actually can survive what's been happening. Change is speeding up. I remember when I was putting this presentation together, the older TV advertisement, which posed the question, what if your business model changes 4 times before lunch? A little extreme maybe, but nevertheless, the speed with which organisations have to change is increasing. Those changes, nevertheless, need to be effectively planned and implemented, but there is much to consider when it comes to changes. One of the ways that we see that's very effective in any organisation about change, about improvement, is to use the PDCA cycle. That's plan, do, check, act, or the OODA loop, which is another version of the same thing, which is to observe, orient, decide, and act. Most organisations, however, just do, plan, do, plan, do, plan, do. There is seldom true reflection whether that plan and the activities that were implemented in the do stage are truly effective, and the cycle is then broken. Also, a lot of plan, do, check, act activities involve multiple turns of the wheel. It's known as the Deming wheel in some quarters. So plan, do, check, act is not just one single turn of the wheel. Rather, it is more about multiple turns of the wheel. The most successful manufacturing company in the world have this motto about planning long and implement quickly, taking time to put the plans together, to understand that the plans are going to work, when maybe doing small pilot projects, to understand that the plans are going to work, and then implementing those plans quickly because you know they're going to work. A very effective way of change. Another control process that we need to have in place is internal audits. From experience, I can say that it's easy to say and difficult to do effectively. I've been auditing for 5 years in many countries with some very large clients before I had to do my first internal audit of the company I work for. And it was an interesting experience, to say the least. It's a bit daunting, and it gave me a whole new level of understanding of the complexity and the issues that organizations face when it comes to implementing an internal audit program properly. But if it's done right, it can be an extraordinary driver for continual improvement if it's done right. If it's just about ticking boxes, believe me, it's not going to deliver a whole bunch of value. You have to conduct internal audits. It's a requirement of ISO 9001. Hopefully your SMEs, your subject matter experts that you've trained that have been trained and learned about the standard, will be able to do these audits, but they must be in a planned, systemic way to make sure your business management system is doing what you want it to do to help improve your business by meeting your own requirements. Internal audits also demonstrate that you're meeting the requirements of ISO 9001. They internally demonstrate to your organisation that you're meeting the requirements. It's also to make sure that your business management system is actually in place and it's effective and it's being maintained throughout the organisation to help the business meet its obligations and strategies going forward. More on internal audits. It's sometimes the people get the tools mixed up, and it's important to realise that the internal audit tool is the find it tool. It's where we're finding the problems. It is not a fixing tool. The internal audit tool provides an output in the form of non-conformances and reports, which form an input into other processes, such as the fix it tool. For instance, you don't fix a broken leg with an X-ray machine. So you use the audit to find the problem, and then the other tools to correct the issues, or indeed to build upon successes that the audit might have identified. It's not all about finding problems. It's also about finding good things to do that could be replicated. The other thing is audit where you need to. Your internal audit program should be looking at the past history. If you have a particularly clean area, do you really need to be auditing it every 5 minutes? You look at risk. If it's a high risk activity that's going on, that's fundamental to giving the customer what they want when they want it at a price they're prepared to pay, that activity should perhaps be audited more often. If it's an important activity, for instance, with the safety of people in mind, or indeed to meet statutory and regulatory obligations, perhaps that process should be audited more frequently. There are some hints around this that is typically the organisation that I work for, the certification organisation, that we do need to see that you have conducted an entire an audit of your entire system prior to your certification audit. Basically, this means that you know your system is working properly, and any gaps have been identified and in the process of being mitigated or have been mitigated before the certification audit. Our rules are in TUV that we need to see that you go through the entire system thereafter at least once every 3 years as a minimum. You'd be a smart idea to justify why you are not auditing everything. Again, you can demonstrate that you might be auditing one area once every 3 years based on its past history. Maybe it's low risk. Equally, there are other aspects of and other activities within your organisation that you will need to audit far more often. It's up to you. You know your organisation. The rationale would need to be justified to external auditors. So keep the justification for why you've not audited everything and include it as part of your audit program records. Another aspect that in the 9001-2015 standard is a requirement to analyse the data that your organisation produces. The ISO 9001 does specify a minimum of 7 things that need to be evaluated. And in the interest of time, this perhaps is not the right time to go into all of those 7 things in detail because that they are listed in the standard. They're fairly straightforward, but nevertheless, you do need to demonstrate to yourself and to external organisations that you have conducted an analysis. The intent, the extent and the depth of the analysis that you conduct and what else aside from the minimum is up to you. It's your business, you understand it, but we do need to see that you have analysed the 7 things in the standard. And it is all about trying to improve the business. Another aspect that is called for in the 9001 standard is continual improvement. And I've deliberately titled this slide "It's Better Than It Was," as this was one organisation that I audited. It was their strapline for how they demonstrated that the subject of continual improvement was actually captured in their hymn sheet. A simple statement: it's better than it was. That is continual improvement. So that's something that is appropriate to that organisation. It is another large subject. In an ideal world, you could improve everything all of the time. But however, realistically, it's simply not practical to do this. We do have limited resource. So it's important that you go for the biggest bang for your buck. Where are you going to get the biggest results from continual improvement? Equally, the priority of any continual improvement must be focused on the needs of the customer. Whatever you're doing, try to make that customer experience enhanced as a result of the continual improvement activities that you do. I mentioned in the previous webinar, and in fact earlier in this webinar, that we should have mapped the processes the way they are, not as you would want them to be. And there's a reason for this. Continual improvement also applies to the processes of the management system. And part of that analysis and evaluation that I spoke to on the previous slide is as it applies to the process of the business management system. Over a period of time, might not be a tremendous amount of time, but at 2 or 3 months, you should have collected a certain baseline performance level of those processes. So you understand when the process is ticking along, it's turning out it has a certain performance factor, and you can ascertain that because you've put methodologies in place to monitor and measure the effective operation of your processes of the business management system. So now you've got that baseline performance in, you can start applying improvements to the processes. And from the fact that you are working with data, you have the before measurement from the baseline performance. As a result of applying any improvement, you can then look at the resultant data to prove that you have actually improved the process. This is not about gut feelings. It's all about data. Data-driven improvement is a vital part of any organization. It's also important to be able to demonstrate to yourselves and to other organizations how you've improved the processes as a result of continual improvement. Continuing with it's better than it was, it's still a big subject. I also suggest, again, using the PDCA cycle and OODA loops. Again, that plan, do, check, act cycle is a fundamental underlying foundation of any improvement in any organization. But there are many improvement methods out there, the A3 methodology, Kaizens, there's all sorts of methodologies that are available out there. They're all in the public domain, so I rather don't think that now is the time to go into those details of those improvement methodologies. However, remembering the important part is continual improvement is just that. It is continual. There is one subject I would like to take the liberty of touching upon in today's webinar, and that is something that I've experienced with great frustration over the years while I have been doing this job, and that is waste. Toyota identified 7 wastes, and with the waste of human potential, it then takes that up to 8 wastes. I've calculated on more than a few occasions that the value add ratio of any organization seems to be, so the value add ratio is the ratio between activities that add value in alignment with what the customer is buying, the customer proposition, and do not add value, so waste. I've done numerous calculations, and actual fact, the net value add ratio is alarmingly low, somewhere between 0.5 to 2%. And that means as humanity, we're paying for 98, 99% waste in everything that we buy. So there is little doubt in my mind that every organization falls into this same area for waste. Now, if you want a continual improvement to really get stuck into, the object of waste elimination is ripe and fertile ground for you, for your organization, for your customers. It will improve your profitability. It might be that you can obtain competitive advantage by being cheaper than your competitors. Whatever, either way, eliminating that waste is a fantastic project. And then the next thing is we do what I love to do, not in helicopters, but nevertheless, we get in a helicopter. So what are you talking about, Richard? Getting in a helicopter? It's very easy. We're fighting battles every day. We're striving, we're overcoming obstacles, we're meeting challenges, we're improving on that day-to-day battle that we have to stay in business. And it's very easy to get caught up in that. So there needs to be a way to be able to step back and to see the wood from the trees, to attain a high level 50,000 foot perspective of the entire organization. It's a requirement in ISO 9001 that the leadership of the organization and top management should conduct a review from that 50,000 foot perspective and ask 4 questions of the business management system. 1, is our system effective? Is it actually helping us do what we want to do to keep our customers happy? Is our system suitable for what we do as a business? Is it actually relevant for what we do as a business? Is it adequate for our needs? Does our management system cover everything that we need from it to help us run the organization and achieve our long-term objectives? And finally, something that was added to the 2015 standard is our business management system aligned with the strategic direction of the company? Is our system helping us to achieve where we want to go in the organization X years down the road? And the management review meeting that I'm talking about, or management review, has to be able to answer those 4 questions. The standard does in fact determine a minimum set of input and output requirements from the management review. It's vital that you follow those minimum requirements, even as a minimum. Other things can absolutely come into the management review on top of those input and output requirements, but those minimum input and output requirements must be covered in the reviews. However, having said that, you don't have to cover every subject in every review. For instance, if you choose to do a management review on a quarterly basis, and there are no audit results to feed into the review as an input, you don't have to cover it. There's nothing to cover. So maybe just a line item in the outputs from the review meeting that you have noted that there are no results to feed in. Excellent, you're covering that input. The intent of the management review is to ask those 4 questions of those management of the management system. Management reviews need to be conducted at planned intervals, and it's really important to stick to the intervals. We can have, as an audited organisation, we see quite frequently where management review has been postponed, it's been pushed out X years, but really sticking to the planned interval there is a reason it's a requirement in the standard. It's because you're then able, from review to review, looking forward, ascertain and look at the data that is an input into the review, so you can compare apples to apples. If you're looking at 6 months in one review and a year in the next, it's very difficult to actually look at and determine how things are going, because the data sets are different. If needed, have extraordinary reviews. For instance, in the event of changes, if your business stage changes, market forces are asking you to change, consider having extraordinary review meetings, extra review meetings if needed. I've used the word meetings, and I apologize for that, but there is nothing in the standard that says that they have to be meetings. It is conducting a review of the effectiveness, suitability, adequacy, and the alignment of the management system that's important. It does not have to be face-to-face meetings. Most typically they are, but it's not a vital part of it. How often should you have these meetings? If the pace of change in your industry is slow, maybe once per annum, once per PA is sufficient. If in an organisation where the pace of change is fast, once per quarter or more often would be appropriate, but you determine those planned intervals. Furthermore, drive a conclusion from the review. The purpose of the review is to answer those 4 questions that I've talked to. At the end of the review, drive a conclusion. Capture the conclusion as to whether the attendees feel that the management system is doing what it's supposed to be doing. coming to the end now, and when I was putting this together, it was very difficult to find what to include and what to exclude from this webinar. It's absolutely impossible to cover every nuance and every facet of the standard in 2-hour webinars. That's just simply impossible to do. But I believe I have covered the essentials, and perhaps more importantly, tried to provide some of the basic foundations, as well as implicitly trying to convey what ISO 9001-2015 is all about. It was never the intent to demystify the standard. However, hopefully by providing a little bit of the intent, by not using this, the level of gobbledygook, shall we say, that can be found in the standard, that I've simplified that and makes it a little bit easier. I've also tried my utmost to not use what I call the dreaded Q word. I'm referring to quality. And there are many reasons for this, because fundamentally, I also think that it's perhaps one of the most misunderstood words in business language. Quality, those are the chaps in the white coats at the end of the production line. No, that's quality control. Quality assurance, which is what ISO 9001-2015 is doing. That is assuring that your customers will get what they want, when they want it, at a price they're prepared to pay, is the key aspect here. Finally, I wish you good luck on your journey to certification. I hope this webinar has helped somewhat and will help you with your journey to certification. Please do not hesitate to contact myself or my colleagues at TUV Sud Business Assurance Division if you feel that we can help in any shape, size or form. Clearly, we're not allowed to consult, but we can provide guidance in cases where it's appropriate to do so, because that is in our alignment with the reason that why we are existent. And that is to be the spark that ignites and sustains continuous improvement on the journey to excellence. And now it's time for any questions and answers. So, Mark, I don't know if you can help me, if there are any questions that have been asked during the course of the last 50 minutes. I will try to answer them as best as I can.
Yep, thank you, Richard. We've just got time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. So the first question is, do I need to engage with the certification body at the start of planning for 9001? Hello? Can you hear me, Richard?
Hello, Mark. I'm sorry, if you have any questions, I was not hearing them. I apologise. I think I've cured my technical problem.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can indeed, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so yeah, we've got, do I need to engage with the certification body at the start of planning for 9001?
That is a very good question. Just to make sure everyone heard it, do I need to engage with a certification body on the start of my journey to ISO 9001 certification? Very good question. The answer is no, you don't have to. Absolutely not. You don't have to. However, I would advocate very strongly trying to engage with a certification body as soon as you can in the process, because they will be able to help you with the timelines. They'll be able to help you with guidance on the subject of what needs to be achieved. You will also find that you need to have an understanding and a rapport with an auditor and your certification body. Sometimes that takes time to do. And you'll then, if you don't take the time to get to know your auditor, your certification body, it comes to be that certification audit time, a gentleman or lady that shows up on your site that you've never met before, and you simply find that you're not a fit. There's a personality clash between your leaders, your quality representatives, and the auditor. Finding that out at the time of certification audit is usually a bad idea. So I would advocate it, although it is not a requirement.
Great.
Hopefully that answers the question, Mark. Carry on.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much. Question number 2 was, is there software available that can be used to control my management system?
Another good question. Is there software that can be used to control my management system? Yes, there is the answer to that question. And there's some very good software out there, and also some very complex software out there. The complex software can be absolutely perfect for an organization that is large, has complex processes, can be very useful. There are absolutely software tools out there. And I have no issues, and I've seen it used very well. But nevertheless, you still need to map those processes. That mapping could end up and will end up as part of that software. But the basic hard grunt work that needs to be done to create a business management system will not be included in that software. If you are going to go down the road of using software, I suggest that you trial it, look at it early on in the journey towards certification, so that it can be integrated as part of your progress towards certification, rather than trying to make everything fit afterwards. So again, prior and proper planning, understanding and making sure that that software that you can use, getting it done early in the process is a very good thing to do. Hopefully that answers that question, Mark. Was there
Yep.
another one, or keeping me busy today?
We've got 2 minutes, so the last one really is: do audits have to be performed on site?
Yes. The pandemic has certainly impacted this situation about audits on site. It ranges from certification body to certification body. At the moment, we can do remote audits because of the travel restrictions, and obviously because of the threat of the pandemic. They tend to be a little bit case by case, depending on what the organisation is doing. That is for certification audits. However, most surveillance and recertification audits can currently be done off-site as part of the extraordinary measures around COVID-19. There will also, I believe, much as our way of working generally with hybrid between working at home and working in an office, I believe that that will also impact the way that we do audits going forward. And I believe that there will be a hybrid model emerging, where some audits are done on site and some are done off site. I hope that helps.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Richard. So I think that brings us to the end of the webinar. I'd just like to thank you very much for joining. We will send you a copy of the recording and the presentation after this webinar is finished. We'd really like to hear from you if you've got any ideas and subjects that you'd like to hear about. So if you've got anything you'd like to hear us do a webinar on, please let us know. Get in touch with us on info@tuvsud.com, or there's some email addresses on the screen on the presentation that you'll be sent after this finished. So pretty much we're finished now. So on behalf of Richard and myself, thank you very much for your time, and I'd like to wish you a very good rest of your day. So thank you very much, and goodbye.